People think when a town is evacuated, it goes completely silent. They think the power grid gets shut off, the phones go dead, and nature slowly takes over the empty streets. My name is David. I am an audio forensics expert. Yesterday, I tracked a rogue number station radio frequency deep into the restricted quarantine zone of the Blackwood Valley. The military records say the town of Oakhaven was wiped out by a toxic gas leak in 1994 and has been rotting for 30 years. But when I cut through the chain-link fence, the streetlights were buzzing, the payphones were ringing, and the neon sign on the local diner was still glowing. And the worst part? As I walked down the empty, snow-covered street, every single abandoned car had its radio turned on, and they weren't playing music. They were broadcasting the sound of my own heavy breathing, exactly 3 seconds before I took my next breath. The coordinates led me to a heavy steel barricade covered in faded, yellow biohazard signs. I had spent 6 months analyzing a bizarre audio loop leading into commercial radio frequencies, and the triangulation pinpointed this exact valley. I parked my truck, packed my directional microphone and audio recorder, and slipped through a gap in the fence. The air immediately felt incredibly dense, smelling faintly of ozone and dry static electricity. I walked down Main Street. The houses were perfectly preserved. No rot, no broken glass. I shined my flashlight into the window of a suburban home. A TV was on, displaying a paused frame of a 1994 news broadcast. But when I looked closer at the living room wall, my stomach dropped. The grandfather clock wasn't stopped. The second hand was violently ticking backward. The reality in this town wasn't frozen. It was rewinding. I needed to find the source of the broadcast. My EMF meter was going crazy, pointing me toward a small, 2-story brick building at the end of the street. Oakhaven Local Radio, 104.5. As I approached, the payphone outside the station suddenly started ringing. A shrill mechanical bell, cutting through the dead silence. I hesitated, my hand trembling, and picked up the receiver. There was no voice, just the wet, heavy sound of dirt being shoveled. I dropped the phone and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the radio station. The lobby was empty, covered in a thick layer of gray dust. I followed the glowing red "On Air" sign down a dark hallway. I stepped into the main broadcast booth. The mixing console was fully powered, blinking with hundreds of green and red LED lights. And on the main computer monitor, the audio recording software was actively running. The waveform on the screen was spiking. I froze. The microphone in the soundproof recording booth on the other side of the glass was live, but the booth was completely empty. I looked at the waveform on the screen. It spiked violently every time I took a step. It wasn't recording the empty booth. The microphone was somehow recording the inside of my own throat. Then, the heavy soundproof door of the booth slowly creaked open on its own. A figure stepped out of the shadows of the booth. It was wearing a heavy, yellow military hazmat suit from the 90s. The thick rubber was stained with dark red clay. "Who are you?" I demanded, backing away toward the exit. The figure didn't speak. It slowly reached up with heavy rubber gloves and unlatched its own helmet. As the helmet fell to the floor, I stopped breathing. There was no head inside the suit. It was completely hollow, filled to the brim with fine, white ash. The headless suit raised a trembling arm and pointed a single rubber finger toward the basement door. My audio recorder started emitting a high-pitched feedback whine. I didn't want to go down there, but the air pressure in the room suddenly shifted, pushing me physically toward the door. I grabbed the rusted handle and pulled it open. The smell of copper and decaying earth hit me like a physical punch. I turned on my flashlight and began to descend into the dark. It wasn't a basement. The wooden stairs ended in a colossal subterranean cavern with walls made of smooth black glass. And there they were, the 871 missing citizens of Oakhaven. But they weren't moving. They were physically fused into the black glass walls, their mouths stretched open in silent, agonizing screams. Thick, pulsing black cables ran out of their open mouths and connected to a massive spinning metal obelisk in the center of the room. They weren't killed by a toxic leak. The military had turned the town's population into an organic acoustic dampening field to contain whatever was inside that obelisk. I raised my camera to take a photo. Flash. The bright white light illuminated the cavern. Instantly, the spinning obelisk slammed to a halt. The 871 people fused to the walls simultaneously snapped their heads toward me. Their jaws unhinged, and a deafening, overlapping shriek erupted from their throats. Blind, primal terror took over. I sprinted up the stairs, the glass walls vibrating so hard they began to shatter. I burst out of the radio station, the emergency sirens of the town suddenly blaring to life. I ran through the snow, scrambled through the gap in the quarantine fence, and threw myself into my truck. I slammed the gas pedal, tearing down the mountain road, checking my rearview mirror until the town was miles behind me. I had survived. My heart was pounding. I reached out with a trembling hand and turned on the truck's radio to hear a familiar voice. But it wasn't a DJ. It was my own voice, broadcasting from the speakers. "You didn't leave the town, David. You're still in the basement." I slammed on the brakes. The truck violently skidded to a halt, the tires screaming against the asphalt. I was hyperventilating, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "No, no, no," I muttered, looking out the windshield. The snow was still falling in the headlights. But as I stared at the snowflakes, I realized they weren't falling down. They were floating upwards, and they weren't snow. They were flakes of white ash. I slowly reached out and touched the icy windshield of my truck, but my fingers didn't hit glass. They passed right through it, like breaking the surface of a cold pond. The illusion shattered. The dashboard, the steering wheel, the seats, everything dissolved into black smoke. I wasn't in my truck on a mountain road. I was sitting on the cold, hard stone floor of the subterranean cavern, surrounded by the black glass walls. I had never even made it up the stairs. The 871 citizens of Oakhaven were no longer fused to the walls. The thick, black cables had detached from their mouths, leaving gaping, hollow voids in their faces. They were standing in a massive circle around me, completely silent. The only sound in the cavern was the slow mechanical grinding of the colossal metal obelisk in the center of the room. It was spinning faster now, emitting a low-frequency hum that made my vision blur. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, my audio recorder still clutched to my chest. "Stay back." I yelled, my voice echoing off the glass. But they didn't attack. Instead, the crowd slowly parted, creating a narrow aisle leading directly toward the base of the spinning obelisk. At the end of the aisle stood the headless figure in a yellow hazmat suit. It pointed a heavy rubber finger toward a rusted iron hatch at the base of the machine. I had no choice. The crowd of citizens began to close the circle, forcing me forward. I stumbled down the aisle, the air growing suffocatingly hot. When I reached the base of the obelisk, I saw that the iron hatch wasn't locked. It had a heavy rotary wheel, covered in decades of dried blood and red clay. I grabbed the wheel and turned it. It shrieked in protest, but the heavy door swung open, revealing a small, dimly lit observation bunker inside the machine itself. I crawled inside and slammed the hatch shut behind me, dropping the heavy deadbolt. I was in a claustrophobic metallic room filled with 1990s computer monitors and reel-to-reel tape recorders. It was a military listening post. I grabbed a leather-bound logbook off the main console. The cover read, Project Echo, Containment Protocol. I flipped it open. The military didn't find the anomaly under Oakhaven. They built the town above it to feed it. Oakhaven was a farm. Thud, thud. The citizens were beating their bare hands against the iron hatch. The bunker violently shook. I stared at the monitors. They weren't showing the cavern outside. The screens were displaying live, hidden camera feeds of other small towns. Hundreds of them. Normal people walking their dogs, eating in diners, sleeping in their beds. The underground anomaly wasn't just in Oakhaven. It was a massive, subterranean root system spreading across the entire country. The tape recorder on the desk suddenly clicked on. The reels began to spin. A calm, clinical voice from 1994 started playing from the speaker. The entity requires a constant stream of acoustic distress to remain dormant. The 871 subjects of Oakhaven have reached their vocal limit. Their vocal cords are completely calcified. We need a new broadcaster, someone with a strong frequency. Send out the number station signal. Wait for an audio expert to find it. My blood ran colder than ice. The rogue radio frequency I had tracked for 6 months. It wasn't a glitch. It was a fishing lure, and I had bitten the hook perfectly. Suddenly, the deadbolt on the iron hatch began to glow cherry red. The metal was melting from the outside. The heavy door groaned and collapsed inward with a deafening crash. Standing in the doorway was the headless hazmat suit, holding a thick, pulsing black cable in its hands. Behind the suit, the 871 citizens of Oakhaven raised their hands, pointing directly at my throat. I backed up until my spine hit the cold metal wall of the bunker. There was nowhere left to run. The headless suit stepped inside, the black cable writhing in its grip like a live snake. They didn't want to kill me. They needed a new voice for the radio tower. They needed me to broadcast the next trap. I raised my hands to fight, but the cable lunged, wrapping tightly around my jaw and prying my mouth open. I fought with everything I had. I grabbed the thick, writhing black cable with both hands, trying to pry it away from my face. But it was incredibly strong, like a muscular python. The headless hazmat suit pinned me against the metal console. The cable forced its way past my teeth, sliding down my throat. I couldn't breathe. I was gagging, choking on the taste of battery acid and dead earth. But I didn't suffocate. The moment the cable locked into my vocal cords, the physical pain completely vanished. My vision exploded into a blinding white light. I wasn't just in the bunker anymore. My consciousness expanded. I could feel the cold wind blowing through the empty streets of Oakhaven above me. I could feel the rusted metal of the town's radio tower scraping against the sky. I had become the antenna. Through the connection, I saw the truth of November 12, 1994. The military didn't fail to evacuate the town. They deliberately sealed it. I saw memories that weren't mine. I saw black unmarked helicopters dropping acoustic-dampening pylons around the forest edge. The military knew this entity fed on human vocal frequencies, so they fed it an entire town to keep it asleep. but the 871 citizens of Oakhaven were burning out. 30 years of constant, silent screaming had destroyed their vocal cords. The entity was starving. It needed fresh meat. It needed a strong, healthy voice to lure in the next batch of victims. And as an audio forensics expert, I had the perfect pitch. My own voice suddenly blasted through my head, broadcasting out across the country on the rogue number station frequency. It was using my vocal cords like a puppet, chanting a series of geographic coordinates. It was setting the trap for the next town. If I didn't stop it, another 800 people were going to be dragged underground. But the entity made one massive mistake. It didn't just hook into a random victim. It hooked into an audio engineer. I knew how frequencies worked. Sound is just a physical vibration. The black cable in my throat was a two-way street. It was sending a signal out, but that meant I could send a signal in. I stopped physically fighting the hazmat suit. I closed my eyes and focused entirely on my own diaphragm. I couldn't speak, but I could hum. I matched the low, vibrating frequency of the massive metal obelisk. And then I forced my vocal cords to drop exactly 1/2 step lower. I created an acoustic phase cancellation, an anti-frequency. The reaction was instantaneous. The phase cancellation sent a violent acoustic shockwave directly back through the black cable. The massive metal obelisk violently shuddered, grinding gears screaming in protest. Outside the bunker, the giant black glass cavern walls began to crack and shatter like ice. The headless hazmat suit convulsed, its rubber exterior melting as the frequency destroyed the biomass inside. It dropped me to the floor. I grabbed the thick black cable and violently yanked it out of my throat, coughing up thick black tar. The connection was broken. The radio broadcast died. I grabbed the 1994 classified logbook off the console, kicked the melted iron hatch open, and stumbled out of the bunker. The cavern was collapsing. Massive chunks of black glass were falling from the ceiling, crushing the empty, hollowed-out bodies of the Oakhaven citizens. I ran blindly through the dust and falling debris, looking for the wooden stairs leading back to the surface. But when the dust cleared, I realized the stairs were gone, crushed under tons of rock. My only way out was a massive, newly opened tunnel leading horizontally deep into the earth, pointing directly toward the neighboring city. The cavern behind me was completely sealed by hundreds of tons of collapsed bedrock. I was trapped. The only light I had was the fading beam of my tactical flashlight, and my only companion was the 1994 classified logbook tucked inside my jacket. I turned around and faced the new, massive tunnel. It wasn't a natural cave. The walls were perfectly smooth, melted into glass by an unimaginable heat. I started walking. The air in the tunnel was stale, smelling faintly of sulfur and old electricity. My boots clicked against the smooth glass floor. But what terrified me wasn't the silence. It was the sheer scale of the tunnel. It was 40 feet wide and perfectly straight, angled slightly upward. It felt like I was walking through the barrel of a massive subterranean gun. I stopped dead in my tracks. Click. A sound echoed from deep within the darkness ahead. I instantly killed my flashlight, plunging myself into absolute, suffocating pitch black. I pressed my back against the cold glass wall, holding my breath. 30 seconds passed. Nothing. I was about to turn my light back on when I felt it. A slight breeze against my sweaty cheek. Wind. Deep underground. That meant only one thing: ventilation. A connection to the surface. I started walking faster in the dark, keeping my hand trailing along the smooth wall for guidance. The breeze grew stronger, bringing with it a smell I didn't expect. It wasn't pine trees or snow. It smelled like hot asphalt, exhaust fumes, and deep-fried food. A tiny pinprick of yellow light appeared in the distance. I broke into a run, my boots echoing loudly now. As I got closer, the smooth glass walls of the tunnel abruptly ended, transitioning into rough-hewn concrete and steel rebar. The tunnel was intersecting with human construction, a modern subway maintenance shaft. I reached the light source. It was a heavy, rusted iron grate set into the ceiling of the concrete shaft. The wind was blowing down through it. I grabbed the iron bars and pulled with everything I had. It shrieked in protest, showering my face with rust and dust, but it gave way. I shoved the grate aside, grabbed the concrete ledge, and hauled myself up. I tumbled out onto a dirty, tiled floor, gasping for the polluted city air. The fluorescent lights above me flickered violently. I was in a deserted, grimy subway station bathroom. I scrambled to my feet and pushed through the swinging doors into the main terminal. It was 3 a.m. The station was mostly empty, but outside the glass doors, the city of Seattle was alive and glowing. Seattle? I had driven 3 hours into the remote Blackwood Valley to find Oakhaven. I had walked down a tunnel for maybe 2 miles. It was geographically impossible for me to be in the middle of a major metropolis, unless the anomaly wasn't just under the forest. It was a route system spanning hundreds of miles, directly connecting to major population centers. I stumbled out onto the rainy street, my clothes covered in dirt and dried blood, looking like a madman. I pulled the 1994 logbook from my jacket and sat on a wet bench under a streetlight. I flipped past the containment protocols to the final page, marked Expansion Projections 2026. The page was a map of the United States, but it wasn't a standard map. It was covered in hundreds of red dots, connected by thick, black lines representing the subterranean glass tunnels. Oakhaven wasn't the center. It was just the tip of one tiny route. The military didn't contain the entity. They had simply surrendered the small towns to buy time, while the anomaly positioned itself directly under every major city in the country. I sat on that wet bench in Seattle, staring at the map from 1994. The red dots weren't just small towns anymore. They were under New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, London, Tokyo. The document didn't say containment failed. It said incubation complete. For 30 years, the government wasn't trying to destroy the anomaly. They were feeding it rural towns to keep it asleep just long enough for us to build our modern world above it. And the target date written at the bottom of the map? 2026. The entity doesn't just want to eat 800 people anymore. It has grown. Its root system is completely integrated into our subway lines, our sewer systems, and the deep underground fiber optic cables that power our internet. It was waiting for us to connect the whole world together. Think about it. Over the last few years, how many news reports have you seen about unexplained sinkholes swallowing cars? How many times have you read about a mysterious humming sound in major cities that scientists can't explain? They blame it on industrial factories or tectonic plates. They are lying. That hum is the sound of the obelisks spinning up. I didn't go to the police. If the government covered up the erasure of an entire town in '94, walking into a precinct with this logbook would be a death sentence. I checked into a cheap motel, paid in cash, and locked the door. I pulled out my laptop, my hands shaking, and started digitizing the audio files and the pages of the logbook. I had to get the truth out. But as the upload bar reached 50%, my EMF meter on the desk started screaming. All the red lights maxed out. I looked at the motel room door. The peephole went completely dark, like someone was standing right outside, pressing their eye against the glass. Then, the power in the entire city block went out. It wasn't the government outside my door. It was the entity. It knew I had severed the connection in Oakhaven, but it didn't need the physical glass tunnels to find me anymore. I watched in horror as my laptop screen flickered. The Wi-Fi connection didn't drop. Instead, the network name changed from mutel_guest to a string of geographic coordinates. My coordinates. That is the terrifying truth. The anomaly has evolved. It doesn't need to drag you underground to fuse you to the walls anymore. It has tapped into our cellular towers. It is using our 5G networks, our Wi-Fi routers, and the audio compression of our social media apps to broadcast its frequency directly into our homes. The government isn't protecting us. They are just trying to manage the harvest. The entity uses specific audio frequencies to slowly calcify your vocal cords and paralyze your nervous system. Have you ever felt that sudden, sharp ringing in your ear? Or woke up with sleep paralysis, feeling a heavy weight on your chest, unable to scream? That's not a medical condition. That is the visual handshake. I hit publish on this video the exact second my motel door began to splinter inward. I don't know if I'll survive the night, but you need to know the truth. The 871 citizens of Oakhaven died to warn us, and the military buried them. The frequency is already in the airwaves. It's in the podcasts you listen to, the trending sounds on your feed, and maybe, just maybe, it's hidden in the background audio of this exact video. If you are watching this, and you suddenly hear a low, vibrating hum coming from beneath your floorboards, do not hide in your closet. Do not call the police. And whatever you do, do not look under your bed.